Okay, another day. Get that tool and that paper and get to drawing whatever you'd like for 10 minutes. So here we are in part 2, answering yesterday's question about distracting internal dialogues and their intrusive nature on the practice of art got me thinking about this problem more generally. And I thought this might be a good time to continue the discussion in a more generalized mode, because I think that might be more helpful to some people, even though it does go beyond the discussion of drawing. So while you draw today, I'd like to bring your attention to the elevated position we have given some of our sensory data. Some of our sense inputs we give a special privilege. The 5 senses normally encompass sight, smell, taste, hearing, and tactile sensation. I'd like to add to that a 6th sensation, the mind. Maybe to put it more accurately, the sensation of experiencing thoughts. Here's my case for why we can consider that a sense. It's my view that the senses, taken as a whole, should be able to describe a complete picture of our moment-to-moment experience. If the senses are the gates through which all experience must flow, then nothing can be experienced outside of the purview of a sense gate. The traditional 5 senses come very close, even in extreme situations. Being chased by a tiger, for example. Everything about being chased by a tiger can be described in terms of what we're seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, and feeling. Even the ice-cold snap of sudden existential fear can be broken down into its abstract presentation as certain tactile sensations in the stomach, throat, and knees. But these 5 fail in one important area, which is the sensation of reflectively asking during the attack, am I going to die, or what should I do? Maybe in this extreme, it's unlikely we would operate on anything but instinct. But we can imagine, hypothetically, having a distinct thought even in this situation. And we know for certain other dire circumstances have room and time for lots of thoughts. Either way, we can see that adding the mind and its conscious experience as the 6th sense allows us to completely cover the entirety of possible human experience. Even if you were to gaze upon the very face of God, the most supernatural human experience possible, it would need to be experienced in the context of the senses or the recognizable obliteration thereof. Indeed, your conception of God would need to sit comfortably in the field of your thoughts, or else it wouldn't be happening to you in any recognizable sense. It would instead redefine you as some new being with which you are not currently synonymous. So I'd ask you to assess today why, as a member of the senses, we privilege thoughts. We say they are the most important. Let's call thoughts mental objects to broaden the scope of our discussion and to also include any non-linguistic formations that we know are only being experienced in the mind and could not be said to be occurring in the sphere of another sense. We give mental objects the special quality of being the senses we self-identify with. At an extreme, we imagine an unlivable horror show where all of our other senses were annihilated, but so long as we had our mental objects, we would still be very much ourselves. So we think. I would make the case that this is a spurious and unnecessary identification, if an insistent one. I'd like to drag thoughts off the pedestal and back down to their proper place on an even level with sight, touch, smell, taste, and hearing. Let's make that case by breaking all of the senses down into their sense gate and their assigned sense object. The sense gate of hearing is the ear. This is where hearing makes contact even if we're not aware of the ear. And its biologically assigned sense objects are vibrational waves that the brain interprets as sound. The sense gate of vision is the eye. This is where vision makes contact even if we're not aware of the eye. And its assigned sense objects are photons of light that the biological brain interprets as sights. You don't hear vision and you don't see sounds unless something unusual is going on. And so on with the tongue and taste, the nose and smell, and the nervous system with tactile sensations. Mental objects, thoughts, are just the same. The sense gate of mental objects is the mind space. This is where mental objects make contact even if we're not aware of the mind space. And its biologically assigned sense objects are linguistic and non-linguistic cognitive formations, which the brain interprets as thoughts, emotions, feelings, patterns, and so on. I know there is a snake biting its own tail situation there. Why would the brain interpret a thought it offered up in the first place? I don't know why, but it's obviously true, since you can't choose to turn off your stressful thoughts, and when they arise against your wishes, they then produce new thoughts, which must be coming from your brain, and they then trigger new bodily sensations and emotions. I am aware that the analogy breaks down somewhat here, and I think that's just inevitable because we're dealing with something very subtle. But hopefully, that was a close enough approach that you got some gut feeling of what I'm getting at. If I lost you, think of the other symmetries. Just as you don't hear vision or see sounds, you don't smell mental objects, and you don't see mental objects unless something unusual is going on. That would place it in the sphere of a distinct sense. If the analogy peeves you because the brain is reinterpreting formations that it offered up in the first place, I would remind you of the hard practicality and normalcy of this in the case of hunger. And if you think it's unfair to separate the mind space from the work being done by the biological brain in this analogy, I would posit this is an accident of your birth in the current time, as it must have been possible to be aware of your own awareness in the times before we knew of the brain and its functions as an organ. And so, they must indeed be extricable from each other, even though that is difficult in an age where we know awareness arises in the brain organ. I think the main hurdle here is the recognition of the open space of awareness that the mind space is. It's not something that we're often asked to think about, or really ever asked to think about, so it's kind of unfamiliar. We might use other words for it. In meditation, it's often referred to as the open field of awareness. It's consciousness as such, the raw feeling of what it's like to be you behind your eyes. Let's try to point it out like this. Do you think you spend every moment of the day thinking? Is your cognition constantly filled with noise? If it's close to that, is there not some gap, some space of emptiness between these thoughts? That gap would be the mind space. Even if it is 100% filled all the time, would these thoughts not need to be occurring on some sort of substrate, a field on which they are drawn? Then that is the mind space. There is some background experience that is not a thought, that allows you to be aware of thoughts as they come and go. You can try this. Maybe this will help. Say to yourself in your mind, over and over again, the phrase, I am a conscious being. I am a conscious being. I am a conscious being. Repeat it over and over again. That thought must be experienced on the back of some other cognitive space. If you repeat that thought over and over again, you get this strange sense that it is not the only thing present. Your experience must be more than just that thought. If all you were, if the you that is present is your thoughts, then repeating the phrase, I am a conscious being, over and over and over again, would be tantamount to having a direct experience of the ground floor of your nature. But it sure as hell doesn't feel that way, does it? Awareness of this inherent aspect of our waking nature is what allows the analogy to continue. The mind space is constantly taking in input, in this case thoughts, whether we are aware of it or not, just like the eye and its perception of vision. A thought about how our mother treated us the other day is the tiger arising uninvited from the bushes. The brain offers up a reaction to this. For the tiger in vision, it is automatic terror and flight. And for the thought of our cruel mother, it is likely something along the same lines. Seen in this light, mental objects, their arising, recognition, and reactions to them are really no different from vision or hearing or any other sense except for the self-reflexive emotional baggage that we assign to them. Though, that is a quality that can indeed be shared by the other senses, as in the case of unconscious self-soothing skin picking or nail biting, a tactile function that we can come to identify as a quote-unquote bad thing about us. Now for the good news. As we said at the start, we don't self-identify with the other senses. That's a privilege given to thoughts, mental objects. As we do with the other senses, we can disentangle self-identification from thought. We can do this now that thought is knocked down a peg and we know thoughts are occurring in a recognizable, open space that is foundational to them. It contains them. Without that space, thoughts could not be witnessed, could not be recognized. We might be tempted to move our sense of self to this open space, but that's tricky because we're not there per se. We instead operate out of that open space. And with that, I think it's probably time to stop. Thanks for drawing today, and thanks for listening.